So I am flying solo. I am sitting here with Dana Meise. This is Crazy Damn Canadians, episode number 31. Lucky 31. And Dana Meise is someone that I've known since high school, maybe just a bit after high school.
Yeah.
Right. Yesterday I accused you of being a heart boy.
Yeah, that's right. I'm College Heights.
Which you are the exact opposite. The mortal enemy of heart boys.
Couldn't get any further away, yeah.
Yeah. But we actually knew each other, and it's funny. It's been a few years since you did. I'm going to say what you did right now. Your most notable thing that you've done in your life is you walked across Canada for a variety of reasons, which we'll go over in a minute. But you successfully did something you called the Great Hike.
Yeah. And
that was how many years ago?
I finished in 2018 to the Arctic Ocean, so I did all three of Canada's oceans.
Right. So before we get into the hike, let's ask a little bit about where are you originally from? Is it PG?
Yeah, I'm born right here. I was raised mostly out of Westlake. So, I just grew up in the wilderness, always outside, always doing stuff.
Where did you guys live? Like right on the lake? You guys have property out there or something?
Blackwater subdivision.
Oh, okay.
Just about 2 kilometers from the lake itself. So it was a nice, easy bike ride when you're a kid.
Yeah, actually, I talked to your friend, Paul. Did you live out there with your mom and your dad, or?
No, I lived out there with my grandfather. My dad had a brain aneurysm when I was 12, and so he couldn't get the care he needed here, so they moved to Red Deer. And I had all my friends here, so I didn't want to, because we kept moving to wherever my dad could get the care, and I didn't want to move anymore, so I just moved in with my grandfather and stuck it out there.
Okay, that's a crazy statement in itself, so I'm just going to unpack that for a second. So, because you would think if you had a brainism, what do you mean couldn't get the care?
Well, we were trying to get him, we couldn't get the right nursing care at the time to come in and help with my dad. He was really a lot to take in. My mom really took her wedding vows seriously. So, and we couldn't get him into a home either for the longest time. So Alberta had a lot more programs for nurses to come in and take care of him. Because of course he couldn't walk, he couldn't talk, he couldn't feed himself. So we used to have to feed him with a syringe and a tube, and do all that stuff. So have coming in to help bath him and stuff like that.
I don't think that would be a factor in Prince George now.
Nowadays, no.
Yeah, like Aim High.
There's a lot of programs
physical disabilities.
Yeah.
That's funny though.
Back then.
Like right then, you're already talking about back then, and we're only in our mid-40s.
Yeah.
That back then, if you needed help with even tube feeding, that you had to leave Prince George is a wild thought.
Yeah. They just didn't have the staff, and they just didn't have the programs here.
So you lived at Westlake with your grandfather. What was he like?
He was hard. It was like always work time. You never bored. Never ever say you're bored, or else he'd put you to work. We'd grow enough potatoes to sell a bunch, and we had enough chickens to sell a bunch, and would sell eggs and stuff like that. So of course that was my job, right?
Right.
My job was the hilling of the potatoes, and he was more of just the groomer.
Yeah.
I did all the hard labor stuff.
Did your grandpa work anywhere in town too?
No, he used to be a instructor at CNC as a faller instructor, but he had a tree hit him and injure his back really bad, and then just years of chainsaw work. Back then there was no safety, so he lost his hearing and lost his balance, and so he was already elder, so he was on a disability, and then so he'd sell the potatoes and stuff for extra bingo money and stuff like that. I never saw a dime of it, though. I put in the work.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're 12 years old, your dad has a brain aneurysm, you move in with your grandpa, who puts you to work kind of working on your little farm, but you're still going to school every day.
Yeah.
So that was your evenings and weekends, but there's not a lot else to do when you live out there, right?
No, I was pretty much a recluse. I joined sports, so I played local sports. I played on the rugby team, I played football. So that was my social outlet, was Sunday games or practices or whatever.
Yeah, and you played in Prince George for the local teams, so you would have been on the Raiders.
I was on the Raiders.
Yeah, because I went to College Heights, and so you still follow the Raiders. Is that the connection? You're like, just same name?
I just kept with the team. It was my dad's favorite team before his aneurysm. So it always had been the team that we always watched anyway. So I just happened to be, get drafted onto the Raiders locally and end up playing for them. And so we just stuck with the Raiders.
Now, why do I kind of remember, though, from high school or the era just after high school, were you a little bit of a tougher guy, or would you call yourself quiet?
We got in some trouble.
And I seem to remember you being a tougher guy.
Specifically just going up to the hard highway for fun. And then making sure everyone knew you were from College Heights kind of idea.
Okay, yeah.
That was a short-lived period of time. You're right.
I'm not gonna bury you in bad stuff. I was just curious.
No, we were troublemakers.
We were all 18, 19 years old.
We were young, yeah.
That rivalry, I think, that people had between schools back
it was
then
heavy
was a funny
back
thing.
then.
Yeah.
I mean, I of course I don't know anything about the school rivalries now, but back then it was like really intense.
I don't think that's a thing with social media. Now I think you Snapchat people bad stuff or something like that.
Yeah.
Even that was not a relevant statement, probably. I don't even know if Snapchat's a thing anymore.
There was always these weird neutral grounds like Spruce Land or whatever, whereas like you get caught there and there's the two different schools going to the same McDonald's on a Saturday night or whatever.
Yeah, that's comical.
It was a weird rule.
All right, so you leave high school and all the drama, and you got what occupation? Forestry, right?
Yeah. I worked in forestry practically before I went and got a degree in forestry. And it was basically one of those things where it was like, if you don't want to be someone's lackey, then go back to school. Simple. So I did. So I just worked forestry for my whole life.
When you say worked forestry, what jobs were you doing 19 years old out of school?
I did a lot of timber cruising, block layout. I did some tree planting for quite a few years. Silviculture surveys, free growth surveys. I mean, I could go on and on, but unless you're in forestry, you probably wouldn't have any idea what I'm talking about.
I have some friends who did some of those, so I know the names, you're right, but as people are watching us, they won't know, so we won't dwell on that. I would like to say, in talking with your friend Paul, and he's who I spoke to figure out kind of what we were going to discuss, he mentioned that, you were always a top achiever in all these different things. And would you agree or disagree with his assessment that if everybody else walked 30, you were kind of obsessed and would have to walk 35?
Yeah, if we were doing plots and someone, I'd be like, how many plots are you going to do? 40. So then I'd make sure I'd do 41 or 42 or whatever it took.
And the reason I ask that is because it takes a different kind of person to first of all set out to do anything like walk across Canada, one of the biggest countries on the planet, So it's more about the mindset. What do you think drove you to be like that? Why were you so motivated to do 41?
I don't know. I just really enjoyed doing it. It was also as a crew leader a lot of times. So if you lead by example, for example, if you have a crew and you guys are going 20 plots a day, and that's lowballing it all the time, I'd come in and I would set a bar. Because why set it low when you can set it high? And that would ultimately end up, our crew would be the one that would get all the work because we'd be the one always hired everywhere because we could get the job done on time, all the time, right? I always told my guys, because lots goes wrong in forestry, right? So if you have an average of 40 plots per day and then all of a sudden you have a vehicle breakdown or someone gets injured or whatever happens, that you still have that huge buffer. And because it costs a huge amount of money when you go over contract dates, right?
Right.
So, and it was just a personal challenge of mine. I just enjoyed it. I would, get frustrated. I'd come back after doing so many plots, and if somebody beat me, I'd be like, who the hell do you think you are? Coming in and getting 45 or whatever it was.
So what was it like? I mean, obviously in forestry, another big variable is that there's two main things to be curious about, like being alone in the bush for a significant portion of your life.
That was a huge part of the discipline that I had when I did my walk. Because I used to being alone in the woods, very comfortable in that environment for all day long, for long 10, 12 hours a day, walking through the forest. So when it come to the trail, which was undeveloped at the time, the trail actually got me to, they say, this looks like it's an old trail, could you go look at it for us? And I'd hike it. And oftentimes it meant I was just with a map and a compass bushwhacking. Had no idea where I was in the middle of northern Ontario, hadn't seen anyone in weeks, just trying to map out this and GPS this old trail that used to exist one time in the 1800s or something, Oh,
stop. What?
Yeah, for real. So this wasn't just me on the highway just running around. It was a challenge.
Oh God, I'm such a chronological thinker, but I'm so sidetracked. So hold on a second. There was no trail, actually.
Well, there was a trail through the cities and a lot of the other parts. In the East Coast, for example, Newfoundland, it was their old rail line.
Right.
And so that was pretty easy to follow. But then you get to these places where there'd be these huge gaps. And they ended up taking a lot of the stuff I GPS and used, and they scrapped it. And they just said, we're going to turn Lake Superior into the trail. So that's
the shoreline.
That's going to be a canoe route now.
Oh.
Because they couldn't have the funding in Northern Ontario to connect all these trails. And they couldn't get everybody on board, private landowners to get on board, parks to work together to make this trail happen. So I felt like I was kind of, I'll get into that part later.
Yeah.
But.
So I guess because before we really talk about that, I want to cover a couple more things about what made you the type of person you think you could walk across Canada. And in talking to Paul, some of the other things he mentioned is that you guys actually were disconnected, not even from the logging roads. You would helicopter in to spots. So what was that like? Like taking a helicopter to work every day?
Oh, I did that for years. Flew over the mountains, got to see Mount Robinson lots of times, landed on tops of lots of mountains. And they just drop you off by yourself, and away you go for the day. You have your pickup point, or you have to cut yourself a pad or whatever by the end of the day. So that was, or sometimes they can't get you, and you got to hunker down and dig a hole in the side of a snowbank and call it a night. So it was just that environment and going through all of that is really what made the trail seem relatively easy in some regards. The trail had its own set of challenges for sure.
That's wild to think about it. So anybody who's listening to this is thinking about getting into forestry, just remember that Dana just said that walking across Canada was relatively easy in parts compared to doing forestry.
It is.
Can we store that as a tagline? That's a powerful statement, and that's really cool, actually, that you said that. So tell me I always like asking people, what's a crazy memory from being in forestry? Just something that was wild. We asked this of, what was his name? The dude that built all the trails, Gerald. Dave King. Built all the trails around northern BC, and asked him about grizzly encounters, and how often did that happen with you when you were out there, would you say?
All the time. All the time you'd see grizzly bears or whatever. Like one time we finished this job and we're on this, I think it was the Bow River maybe. I can't remember, but we're in this tall grass and we're just waiting for the chopper to come. So we're all laying down, we're just exhausted, tired. And all of a sudden we hear splash, splash, splash. And I sit up, and from me to you is this moose just looking right at me as I was crossing this river and didn't know I was in the grass. And I'm just sitting there. And it was springtime, so the river was quite high. And so the moose slipped and fell, and then all of a sudden just got swept downstream trying to paddle its way as it slowly disappeared. But I thought for sure it was just going to keep coming forward right at me. And then, there's so many bear stories, I don't even know where to begin.
Well, Paul was talking about the one where you and a couple of the guys actually walked over a bear den.
Oh yeah, that one was scary. I painted that bear's face pink. Someone's bear spray safety clip had broken off the day before, and with the bear spray had gone off in the tail boom of the chopper, which is really dangerous, right? So the next day they said, you guys have the option to work or not. Some people chose not to work. As a crew foreman, I had to fill in for another guy who refused work because we weren't allowed to carry bear spray until they found out what the problem was. They had to investigate. So that particular day we didn't have bear spray. So we come down and we land in our spot and we're going, and all of a sudden I hear one of my guys yell bear. And usually when somebody says that, it's way in the distance and you can see it. Well, in this case, it's running full bore. And this guy that I'm with is about 6'6". So he literally just up and over this blowdown, just one stepped over it and just left me with this bear. So I jumped right at it with a hatchet in one hand and paint in the other, and just yelled, and it stopped right in front of me, and I just painted his face pink, like just and then it just started freaking out, and then I managed to get away, and then by this time the other two guys were already up, and we had radioed to get evacuated out of there. But I had to keep facing this bear and keep fighting this bear off because it kept charging me. Finally, I got over this blowdown where I couldn't get over, so it tried to circle on me. So we finally get rescued. We go back to the airport, and this is in Grand Cache, and so we have to fill out this report. And they said, well, is there any identifying marks on this bear? And I'm like, yeah, its whole face is pink. And I remember when the ranger went in to find out why the bear was so aggressive, like that extreme aggressive. It's like, well, it had come out of its den and these 2 cubs had come out. And so we had literally walked right over top of it. And here this bear is like, Dana, you just didn't understand how much paint you laid into that bear, like, because its face was bright.
Oh, they found the bear, eh?
Oh yeah, you couldn't miss it.
So they didn't kill the bear, though. They wouldn't have to, because that's.
We simply just don't work that area. We make a certain buffer, and we just allow that to just, no one goes back there. We don't send people back to do those kinds of things.
Right.
Well, sometimes.
Well, later, when the bear and the cubs are going to leave, they're out of the den and they're going to be out wandering, right?
Yeah, they'd probably save it for that particular section for the next year or whatever.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they'll save it and just do it when there's a bigger crew there, maybe.
See, I think that story and the other stories really put a framework down for the kind of person who could plan something like this. I mean, it's still so much bigger because there's like all the variables. Like, so I guess I'm going to ask right now then, how did you end up deciding to walk across Canada? How many times did you have conversations about it before it became a thing? Why did you even discuss it?
I can't remember where I found out about the Trans-Canada Trail, but I realized that nobody had ever really done it. And I was like, I wonder if it's even possible. And so this is in my mind the whole time I'm working in forestry and trying to think of how I could do it. And then my dad had a stroke after. It took my dad years to learn how to walk again. He had a stroke and he lost his ability to walk forever. So he's in a wheelchair now still. And so I remember that was just a defining moment where I just said, I'm going to do it. So I went to my dad and we're just chatting and I said, I'm going to walk it up for the both of us. And that's how it started. And it still took me about 1.5 years, 2 years to get all my finances in order and get to a place where I could just walk away from my career, take a flight out to Newfoundland and start walking. And I chose Newfoundland. Even though I'm from BC, you'd think the obvious choice would be here, but I wanted to feel like, number one, I was walking home, and number two, I didn't want any distractions. Like people being like, hey Dana, come on, why don't you hang out for the weekend on the lake? Because there's nowhere I couldn't go in BC where I didn't know somebody. Yeah. And I wanted to completely 100% focus on just getting up and doing this job that I made for myself.
So Paul says that you had he said initially you just said you wanted to actually just walk across Canada. He says initially, I think Dana just wanted to walk across Canada. Is it possible? And he says you got drunk one night and you were talking about the fact that you wanted to cross Canada. And Paul says, he says you deny this, but he says he got irritated and said, if you're going to do it, just do it and I'll buy you a one-way ticket. It was something like that, except there's a funny story about how he messed up. So when I was going to do it, he bought me the ticket to go to fly north, south, or east, right? But here's the funny part. He bought me a ticket not for St. John's, Newfoundland. By the time I looked at my ticket and I realized where I was going, I was St. John's, Nova Scotia?
No, New Brunswick.
Oh, New Brunswick, yeah.
So I ended up in New Brunswick. I had to go get a hotel room. And I'm like, I'm still like 1,500 kilometers from where I'm going to start.
Oh, you actually flew to completely the wrong
city
province.
At 1 o'clock in the morning, and I completely... When we landed in Montreal and they said it was a quick half an hour flight to our destination flight, that's when I clued in immediately because I understand geography really well. And I was like, oh, no. Don't tell me this is real.
You are kidding me.
So I started in the wrong city, and I didn't start walking from there. I looked on getting the buses were packed full. I couldn't get another flight. It was too expensive. So I decided to hitchhike. So I hitchhiked to Halifax, and then from there I hitchhiked and met up with some nice people that ended up being a huge part of the story at some point. But so they took me down over to the ferry. So I took the ferry across, and then once I crossed the ferry, I just took the bus. I wasn't going to hitchhike across because Newfoundland is a pretty big island. I think a lot of people don't realize that, but it's like 800-900 kilometers end to end, right? So I just took the bus and ended up in finally St. John's after 2 weeks of just meandering our way to the East Coast. So
describe that to me. When you're deciding to do this, like it must have been a very expensive undertaking. First of all, what did you have to do to prepare for this?
Yeah, well, I just saved money and I just had a tight budget. It was that simple. Like the thing is I wanted to do it differently too. So I wanted to explore all the historical sites and everything, because the trail was designed to connect those, right? So I thought, well, the only way to do that is to really do it mostly in the summertime. And then I'd fly back to wherever. Because at one point I hadn't been home in 5-6 years, because I'd fly straight to Grand Prairie and work out of Grand Prairie for a while. And the minute my contract was up, I'd fly straight back east and start walking again. So that's how I funded it, was just working in the winter times in the bush, completely 100% focused on the journey, and then flying straight back to where I left off and continuing on. And that way there, I also got to see the best of the country in a lot of senses, because the country shuts down in winter. I did the Arctic in the winter, and then I did some of the mountain stuff in the winter, just to show people that I was capable of doing it. Because everyone was like saying I was a softie. So I did the Arctic in the wintertime, just to show.
It's funny when you're walking across Canada and people can still bait you.
They do.
The problem with men.
They can sometimes.
This is why life insurance costs so much more money for men than it does for women.
Yeah, right.
That's the epitome of why. Because somebody goes, "Oh, you're walking, so you walk the Arctic in the winter."
Yeah.
So, is it true that when you got across to the Maritimes, though, that you started on the wrong trail?
Nope.
Without knowing it?
No. Actually, no. I started on a trail that wasn't the Trans-Canada Trail, but I knew it wasn't. And interestingly enough, it became incorporated into the trail. So the section I didn't exist into the trail until years later. So technically, now that it is Trans-Canada Trail, so I actually hiked it before it was registered as part of the trail. So I was actually, but I did that purposely, because if I would have started at the trail itself, I would have started in the city of St. John's, Newfoundland. But I was too close, because I knew I was going to get 3 points of the Canadian compass. I was going to hit the easternmost point of the whole country, so the trail didn't connect that, but now it does. So I started there. I knew I was going to go to the southernmost part of Canada, both the mainland, both the inhabited, and the southernmost very tip of all of Canada. And then I also
Where's that?
It's called Middle Island, and you have to get a private charter to get there, and it's actually against the law to go. But I got permission to go because I'd already walked all the way there, so they gave me permission. So I was so close that when I walked out into the spit, the American Coast Guard is looking right at me, and I could literally see them and just wave, "Hey." And they're watching me walk on this island that's the southernmost tip of all of Canada.
Why aren't you allowed to go there?
It's a protected park. They actually did it to protect this rare water snake, but then it got overrun by cormorants, and the cormorants ate all the snakes. So it's a big disaster. But there's no foundation there where all the rum runners and all that used to have, like a little hotel there.
So is it a little tiny island?
It's small, yeah.
So you got across there, and then you hiked across.
And then I walked, technically they call it Beaver Creek, but I didn't go to Beaver Creek. That's supposed to be Canada's westernmost point. But I did walk right to the Alaska border. So that's the 3 points in the Canadian compass, the east, south, and west. And of course, north is unattainable, really. It would take, especially to connect it. I'd have to leave from Tuktoyaktuk. And technically, when I lived in Edmonton, I was closer to North Pole when I was in Tuk than I was Edmonton.
You went to Tuktoyaktuk?
Yeah, I walked there. I stood on the Arctic Ocean. It was frozen solid.
Okay, so hold on a second here as I'm visualizing this. So you started up in Newfoundland, you went down across south along the east coast. Did you walk the whole east coast?
The way the trail, I'll explain the trail to you. The trail was designed not to do what I'm doing, It was designed to connect communities. So it basically said anybody who wants the trail, have the trail, will connect communities. So it was more meant for people between communities to enjoy the romantic idea that if you really wanted to, on this trail, you could go anywhere in the country. So the trail zigzags. It's extreme. So it's all over the place. So, for example, the distance I walked was 21,000 kilometers. So that's the same distance if I was to walk I could have either walked from New York to LA 4 times, or I could have walked from New York, to put in perspective, because a lot of people don't understand that, I could have walked from New York across the United States, through British Columbia, through Alaska, across Russia to London, England. That's what 21,000 kilometers is, to put that in perspective. But the trail zigzags. Like, there's times I'd walk for months and then end up only 20 kilometers from where I had just been months ago, right? Because it would go all the way down to Windsor and then come back out, and then it would go way up in northern Saskatchewan. Like, I remember being in northern Saskatchewan once, and this farmer thought I was the worst hitchhiker ever, Because he's like, you're like 200 kilometers from the highway. I'm like, no, I'm walking. Are you lost? No, I'm walking on this trail. There's no trail here. I was like, yeah, this is actually the trail. This road I'm on, this grid road. And, and he's like, you're lost. Like, you're the worst hitchhiker ever. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. But, so just across Canada alone, just the across Canada section was 16,500 kilometers. So that's the equivalent of doing Canada twice, right? So that's how windy this thing is, because it connects 1,000 Canadian towns and cities and 15,000 communities is what it connects.
I don't think anybody, that's really even hard to wrap your head around, like even picturing that. It's not really conceivable. But so how many years, what year did you start doing this?
2008.
So economic collapse to boot.
Yeah.
That's right in the middle of the Great Recession that you started doing this.
Yeah, that didn't affect me whatsoever.
No, I mean, you're out walking, you don't care, it's groceries and walk. You sleep in a tent? What was your day-to-day life like doing this?
Oh yeah, sleeping in a tent, yeah, for sure. Like you just walk until because everyone was like, I ended up with sponsors. Like I was sponsored by Mountain Hardware, Columbia and Keene and all that, and Keene Shoes and satellite telecommunication company called Road Post. And the trail actually paid me to map and give up my notes and my tracking as potential sections of trail, because it wasn't completely connected yet. And so I managed to make a little bit of money, doing that. And everyone said, well, how'd you get these sponsors? And I said, well, first I walked 5,000 kilometers, and then people took me serious. And then I got Keene. And then once I got Keene, Columbia was like, well, this guy's pretty interesting. And this is all from Twitter. Then Columbia just signed me up right away.
What year was Twitter? What year did that start?
That wasn't until 2010, 2011.
So it was 2 years in that you started.
Yeah, I paid for it out of my own pocket, 100%.
Twitter, and you started tweeting. I
still had to fork out a lot of money because I would treat myself sometimes. Like, you get to like a big city, you want to get a hotel or something and finally have a hot shower and relax.
I don't know why my phone picked you up on that.
It was one of the, so yeah, like the big cities were one of the biggest challenges.
Why?
I could say there was 3 major challenges. The big cities, the prairies were brutal, and the Arctic was pretty unforgiving.
And the big cities would be because as you're trying to walk, how do you camp?
Yeah, like a place like Toronto is like 6.5 million people, the greater area. And, if you've never really been there other than just to fly and be in the inner city, when you're walking through it, it's got something like 360 kilometers of trail. Now, how am I supposed to afford a hotel room every single night and try to get public transit? So I would often go to I tried to get to the cities. I'd have people that would let me stay at their house. And one time I got stuck with nowhere to stay, and some just reggae guy out of nowhere who was just finished playing a concert just said, hey man, you're pretty cool, why don't you just stay at my house? And that happened to me a few times in Toronto, where people were like, you're walking on the trail, you must be walking across Canada, why don't you just stay with us? And that happened quite often to Toronto, actually. But when that didn't happen, I'd go right to the police station and just be like, hey, my name's Meise, this is what I'm doing, if you get a call, I need to have somewhere to go. And people, they were usually pretty good about it.
And so where would you stay at those times, though? Just in a park?
I would find some park corner where I would go down to Lake Ontario and find a little hidden spot somewhere where I could just pitch my tent and stay when I didn't have a place to stay. Like at some point I was taking the train back to my friend's house, but at some point I got too far away. It was too much. I had to make kilometers. And then because I was going to historical sites and learning and meeting people at the same time, my days were extremely long. And so I just didn't have time to do any commutes anymore. So I would just try to find some place to stay. Or
how many kilometers did you walk in a day on average?
Probably pretty low on average, just because I stopped to see things a lot. Like I spent a few days at Niagara Falls, obviously, got to check it out. I toured the Battle of Lundy's Lane that made Canada Canada, and so I would do a lot of stuff, a lot of research, a lot of writing along the way, setting up cameras to get a camera shot, having to do a lot of rehearsals because back then I had no way to edit anything. So I'd have to rehearse something, like river crossings were brutal. Sometimes you'd have to do a few of those before you get all your camera equipment and everything across and get the shot right.
How much footage do you have from doing this?
Altogether, I think I have 2 terabytes.
Really? So you digitized it all?
It's all saved and digitized. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're walking 10 or 20, you must have at least been walking 10 or 20
I
kilometers
always said it like
a day.
this. I always said it like this. 20 kilometers to 30 kilometers is an easy day. That's no problem. 40 kilometers, it becomes harder. 50 and 60. Like I've done really big numbers. Like I did 60 some kilometers in Newfoundland, and I did 60 kilometers going up and over Great Creek Pass out of Kimberley. So I've done 60 kilometers a few times. That one was because a bear was following me, and I had nowhere to camp, and it wouldn't leave me alone. So I just kept walking and walking and walking until finally I walked it, and I ended up down it. I was so exhausted. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning by the time the bear stopped following me. So I managed to make camp and get some sleep. And I did what's called Great Creek Pass, and no one had ever done it in a single day before, and I just finished doing that. So all the locals come to me and they're like, "You're a legend, you're amazing, and you're such a hard worker." And I was like, yeah, soaking it all in, right? But the truth of the matter was it was a bear following me. That's why I did it all in a day, because I'd initially planned on doing it in 2 days, camp up top, but once that grizzly was on me, I was like, oh no, not again.
Oh, it was a grizzly too.
Oh yeah, like right there. I had the same thing happen to me in the Yukon too.
So, did you walk down to southern Canada, like close to the border, or like did you have kind of more going across?
All over
and
the
up?
place.
Like, so did you, like no, but like in Saskatchewan, if you're down at the border, you didn't like hike up Saskatchewan and then back down Saskatchewan, though, did you? Like,
oh yeah, sometimes I came into Saskatchewan through up past Riding Mountain Park, I think it was. I can't remember the name of the park. I've been through so many places, I remember them all. Which is northern. They consider northern Saskatchewan, like middle way up there. And then I'd walk all the way south down to nearly the border, and then come back up and walk all the way up to here. Then I'd go off and then hit Regina, and then hit down south again, and then go way up north, and then come back down. Like one time, it took me 5 days to walk from Regina to Moose Jaw, but it's really only a day walk because I had to go up. So that was a really good example of just how the trail was. So if the trail went way out of the way, there was a reason it did that, and it was because there would be something historic or some monumentous event or something really interesting to see. So that's what the trail was designed for.
You are blowing my mind right now.
Yeah.
Like seriously, legitimately, I've talked to you about this, and I remember years back talking to you, but I had no idea that that's what you actually did.
Yeah.
And I know about the hike, but I didn't know this was what the hike was.
Yeah.
You picture, people say the Trans-Canada Trail.
They think A and B, straight line.
You really do. I'm like, oh, okay, it goes up once, fine. But this sounds like a crazy thing.
If you look on the map on the Trans-Canada Trail website, you'll see that it looks relatively east to west, but zoom in on it, and you'll understand really quick the distances you cover.
Has anybody else walked it that you know of?
Well, there's another woman that's getting a lot of praise right now, Diane. She's actually really cool. She was the first person to do it. There's a little misunderstanding between the media here, because I was the first person to ever do the Three Oceans on the Trans-Canada Trail. But she's the first person to ever do it as it was laid out. So she canoed Lake Superior, right?
Oh, yeah.
She did the canoe routes. Well, what people don't understand is there was no such thing as canoe routes when I did it. It was all trail when I did it. And the trails are still there. They still exist. But they couldn't maintain them anymore. So a lot of the remote stuff I did was they scrapped a lot of that. So when they're like, how come you walked it and you didn't take the canoe routes? It was because those canoe routes did not exist at the time when I was there.
Yeah.
So, and even now, the distances between places are a lot different. So they might have erased one section that's way up north, which I did, which was extremely remote and extremely difficult.
Yeah.
And just erased that, and then all of a sudden made a straight line.
When you say the prairies was brutal, was it just because there was nothing to see, or what else was it?
Nowhere to hide in the sun, hot summer days, no water anywhere. Trying to find water to even filter was impossible. Like it was just a grind. You'd have no choices but to go to houses. Like some of the farms there are so massive that it would take you days and days to walk through them. And you're literally walking in squares, right? Because everything's gridded out. Like Saskatchewan, it's just some statistics of Saskatchewan has like 800 and some thousand kilometers of road, right? So you're walking up, and sometimes there'd be nothing interesting, so they'd make the trail straight. And when it's straight in Saskatchewan, it's like, it really almost sinks your heart, because you know there's nothing you're going to see but canola and flax and which can have its own beauty in a sunrise and sunset. It does. But when that's all you see for days, and you know you're days and days and days away, even putting in 40-kilometer, 50-kilometer days, and it's just straight line forever.
I got to be honest with you. I can't even drive to Fort St. John, and that's just an hour of fields, and I'm dying driving.
Well, there was a lot of beauty there, like the sunrises and sunsets and things, but it was also dangerous. Like the wind was brutal, like sometimes. I got caught in hail. Like when you saw a storm coming, there's nowhere to go. Yeah. So I got caught in hail once really bad. That completely destroyed crops, smashed out windows and everything. And I hid in this, in a graveyard. They had this little tiny shed. And I went in and I kicked in the door of the shed and managed to get in just as these big giant this hail comes down. And it destroyed the roof, come in, and I'm hiding underneath this concrete bag. And then I got caught again in hail where I just had to take the beating, and it hurt so bad. It was like getting hit by paintballs, just getting machine gun. I was just like, ow, 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 hiding behind my backpack, just getting pummeled.
Oh, no.
And you just get up and you're just like, and your welts all over the place, and you're like, you have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So the prairies were brutal.
What kind of gear did you have? Like, what were you packing when you went across? What would you have on you, typically?
Typically, like, I'd have my tent, my sleeping bag, all that kind of stuff, the sleeping mat. Then I'd have my camera gear. So I'd have, like, a GoPro and then a super zoom camera. And then I'd have whatever food I had to pack between the communities. So the prairies were easy that way. But the hardest part was I had to pack more water in the prairies. So water weighs, 5 pounds per 1 liter, roughly? Is that what it is?
I don't know, but I know water is one of the heaviest things in your pack.
4 liters of water. Like, people were like, well, because they're like, well, what do you cook on the side of the road? I don't, because I need that water to drink. I can't afford to use it to cook. So I would just eat Cliff Bars or, stuff I could just, jerky or whatever I could just eat. So no real meals between those communities because I had to save it for carrying the water, which was really hard on the body, trying to carry all that. That's why when I hit BC and I was doing those mountain passes, it was just beautiful. I didn't have to carry water anymore. There was a community every 3 or 4 days away, so I didn't have to overpack the food, and there was all the water I could drink just right there, easily accessible. And I was like, I'm so glad to be out of the prairies, man. Yeah, I did.
How long did it take you to cross the prairies in the end?
Wow. Quite a while.
Like more than a year or less than a year?
Quite a while, because I hiked a lot with injury. I had plantar fasciitis really severely in both feet. And so it was a lot of pain to walk through the prairies. Because it's like a lot of people, when you got to a traditional footpath and you have the ups and downs, like, the Grizzly Den Sugar Bowl here or any one of the trails you could take around Prince George, believe it or not, those trails are easier on the body.
Yeah, because you're not pounding the same muscle.
Exactly. On the prairies, it's the same road, the same muscles over, and that repetitive strain was just grinding. It was grinding to your hips and your feet and your.
Yeah.
The minute I hit the mountains, I was just. It
it's
might
the
take
same
a little
thing when
longer.
you run. When you run on a flat, straight road, you end up blowing your thighs out. But if you get little bits of hills, you actually you're like, yes,
exactly.
A hill. And you start running uphill, and you're so grateful that you're using a different muscle. And then you're like tired of uphill. You're like, oh, thank God for a downhill, different muscle.
That's what everyone said to me. They're like, you're going to slow down when you hit the mountains. And I didn't. I took longer days to get the same distances in, but it was so much more enjoyable. Mm-hmm. Like you're using your whole body, going up and down and grabbing a hold of branches and pulling yourself, up these mountains. Because I peaked a lot of mountains through the passes, right? And so I loved it. I felt like I was at home finally again. But the prairies were a grind, and you have no choice but to really knock on doors and ask for water. Like I made it a point to really meet people. So I really reached out to meet people and to get their perspective on where they live. And that's where you find out where all the interesting things were too, because not only would I Google what was ahead in the next town, but you'd ask the locals, and it'd always be something that you'd miss out on if you didn't talk to them, right? So that was another big thing that I did that was different.
How many people are you still connected with from doing the hike, would you think?
Oh, hundreds of them. There's nowhere in this country I couldn't go and just have a place to stay. Like literally nowhere.
So how much did the hike cost you to do, beginning to end? Do you think you spent
probably
out
about
of pocket?
$100,000.
Oh my God. So you spent $100,000 hiking across Canada.
Probably about $10,000 a year over a 10-year period. That's including the flights, getting the odd hotel.
Yeah.
Some of the gear I didn't have sponsors for, so I went through a few cameras that took beatings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And phones that took beatings. So yeah, and then still paying your day-to-day bills, basically.
Back home.
Yeah, like you still get your phone bill, and then sometimes I'd have to still be paying rent, for the first little while or whatever until the lease was up or what have you. So that all added up. So $100,000 is what I guesstimated I'd spent on it.
Well, I think the other thing I would be curious about, having a partner, relationship, a life. How do you have one when you're gone?
You don't really. I mean, you get into a relationship, and it sounds romantic at the time, but the truth of the matter is I'm gone all the time. And, and I wasn't going to stop the hike for nothing. So, yeah, relationships were really difficult. It's hard to convince a girl, like, I'll see you in 10 years. I just got to get to Tuck, and then I'll be back. So I got to go on this walkabout,
Ah, that's wild. The sacrifice you make. Way back to the beginning now. I got to circle full back. So part of it is you just wanted to do it, and part of it was that you wanted to do it for your dad.
Yeah.
He couldn't do it, so I'm going to go do this for us, Dad. Did he follow along?
Oh, yeah. The nurses would read him where I was. In fact, when I was going to do the Arctic, I was at the Welcome to the Alaska Highway sign, and I took a detour, and I walked here to Prince George, right to the home. He lives in Seven Fraser Lodge. And I walked right to his home, and he didn't know I was coming. So I walked the 400-some K out of my way just to walk to my hometown. And I walked here, and CBC's filmed it into a CBC special.
Yeah, I think I remember that, actually.
Yeah.
I remember when you came back, there was a bit of a... I think you messaged me before you got back saying I'm coming back. I can't remember why. I remember talking to you when you were doing the hike at one point, and you're like, here's what's going to happen.
Yeah, so the CBC filmed me coming in and filmed me. Then they went to Simon Fraser Lodge, and my dad just thought they were filming something for the lodge, so he had no idea I was coming. So I would come walking in. And that was legit. I legit had to walk 15 kilometers that day to walk right to where he was in his wheelchair. So that was legit. That wasn't although it was planned with the filming.
Yeah.
That was a legit walk.
So when you were up north, did you walk back then to the Welcome Alaska Center, or did you take a bus back, or get a drive?
No,
back?
I got a ride back.
Yeah.
I got to ride back to the. Yeah, I didn't want to walk anything twice, and I was on a time constraint to get to the Arctic. And as it is, I had to cut that season short in Whitehorse. Just weather had turned really bad, really fast, and it was. And I was willing to go for it, but my sponsors didn't want me to do it. Ultimately, I ended up doing it in the winter anyway.
So when you say your sponsors, the companies that sponsored you, what would they give you? What did they provide towards the end when the hike got bigger and bigger? Were they paying for your food? And
no, they just mostly, like with Columbia, like nowadays they don't give you money or anything like that. They give you product. That's how they do it, at least from my experience. So I have a lifetime supply of Keens, for example, Keen boots, and then Columbia would give me tons of clothes. Obviously, I can't fit them now, but I kept them just in case. And so they'd give me an incredible amount of clothes. Every year I'd have a brand new, super sleeping bag that's good for minus, 40 or whatever, like some hardcore gear. And so I donated a lot of it and gave a lot of it away to some funds, like getting kids out on the trails.
yeah.
I donated a lot of my gear. They probably didn't even know whose gear they were using, but yeah. So that was pretty cool.
So tell me a little bit more about going north, because that's probably one of the harder things I would imagine, other than the prairies, which I can know that's soul destroying. But what was it like going north?
The north was a grind. I mean, I was used to being in this celebrity spotlight of doing these talk shows and, in a sense, and I was used to towns every so many days. And even if it was 2 weeks between towns, I'd get these towns and everyone greet you. And up there, nobody really cared whatsoever. So it was a bit of a, that was my own ego. But I was like, okay, that's fine, but it was lonely. It was unbelievably lonely. Like, it was the hardest thing I have ever done. the seclusion, the quiet there, and then just the craziest moments. Like I was stalked by a grizzly bear there. I walked with a bison for 2 days and named him Leon. He just kept following me, and we just hung out. And then there was highlights though. Like I did, like Stuart McLean of the Vinyl Cafe gave me the Arthur Award, which was pretty cool, and he did a lot for me, because I woke up one morning and I all of a sudden had like 5,000 more followers. And I thought there was a glitch or something. And it was, then I remembered, oh yeah, that's right. I did that thing with Stuart McLean. And him and I, before he passed away, become friends. And he'd always call me up on a personal phone call and we'd talk about the trail and all my adventures. And he's like, Danny, you're probably the only person I've met that has been in more Canadian towns than me. So he's like, I'm kind of jealous of you, you know, because that was his thing, right? So he'd tell me, well, tell me about a town that, you know, that you don't think I've ever been to. And I'd say, oh, St. Martin's, New Brunswick, you got to go there. Straight out of a fairy tale, beautiful place. Man, I've never been there. I can't believe you know about these places. So we used to talk about that. So, yeah, I knew he had cancer and he was stepping away probably before he put it out in public.
That's wild, dude.
Yeah.
And that guy's a legend. Like,
it was such a great conversations I got to have with him. It was just really humble guy, and we had a lot of great talks. He'd tell me about some of the towns that I'd, you know, walked through that he had been to, and I was like, see, I even asked the locals, and you even knew something I didn't know, and so we had this really cool connection that way.
So you're hiking north.
Yeah.
You're lonely.
Oh, that was rough.
Why were you in winter hiking? Like, how did you survive that?
What happened was my satellite, I was running out of money at the time, so I was getting, because I was really like I was injured and I wasn't working as much in the winter, so I was running out of money. And I was also running out of time because I was like, this hike can't continue on, but I have to make it to the Arctic Ocean. So right when I was going to finish the journey, right at the end, I was summertime, I'm ready to go. One of my sponsors dropped me because they sold their company. So a satellite telecommunications company that I had, which was expensive, sold out to Garmin. And so Garmin, they didn't want to honor my sponsorship. So then I got stuck with this massive bill of having to pay for it, and I didn't have the money. So I sat there, and I ended up getting a job in the Yukon roofing to earn money. And then some people donated money because they didn't want to see me. But by the time I got the funds together, it was getting late. It was already late fall, early winter. So I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go for it anyway. I don't want to have to come back up here again. So I just went for it. And I ended up, the craziest story, I ended up with this guy from Belgium who I just met in Dawson City, Yukon. And he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm walking to the Tuktoyaktuk. I was going to go there. I want to go for a walk too. And I'm like, are you serious? And I said, I'll tell you what, if you really are serious about walking, walk with me a few days. Worst comes to worst, you can hitchhike back, you know, whatever. So he goes, and I said, go get yourself some food for about 2 weeks to 3 weeks, because we're not going to have anything. I have a cache of food halfway, but other than that, there's not going to be any cell service. There'll be nothing. Just go get yourself some food. So he went and got himself like all cookies and stuff. Like his pack was filled with all this candy. And I was like, oh no. So we start, so I'm with this crazy Belgian, and we start walking together anyway. And then it's gonna rain, so I was like, do you have your rain gear? And because his English was so bad, he's like, yes, I'm prepared. And he pulls out this little umbrella.
Oh no.
And I'm like, we're in the Arctic, and it's like, but to be fair to him, he toughed it right out to the very end. And
he walked to Tuktoyaktuk with you?
Well, I ended up giving him a bunch of gear. I was like, so I'd give him my spare rain gear. You know, I really, really helped him out. He would have died up there, man. Like, he would just be having all his cookies in his tent, eating them away. And I'm like, if you're going to eat cookies in your tent, man, you go way, way over there. And then he wanted to see a moose really bad. So the first moose he sees were these Inuit had shot this moose. And they had gutted it and everything. So his first experience is just this carcass with this headless moose. And then he got to see one up really close. Some of our gear broke down, and we're on the side of the road fixing the gear. And this moose come walking up, and he was just completely blown away by the size of it. Yeah. And then it just completely humbled him. And then he was ignorant towards bears, and he kept saying he wanted to see them. So we had seen bears in the distance, but then he got an up close of a grizzly bear that crossed in front of us. And once he saw how fast it's, because this is how much he didn't know. I was like, keep your food out of your tent or you're going to get in trouble. I was like, Dana, how the bear's going to get in? I zipped my tent up. And I was like, so I just kind of made this claw noise. It just went like this. I was like, oh. Like he had really no clue, right? So, but that was the first time I'd ever had company. And we were like this really odd couple. It was just weird.
How many days did you guys hike together for?
We were together for 3 months.
Oh, no way.
Before we finished the hike, he ended up getting really sick and got a cold. And then I took a bad fall and ended up with severe concussion and ended up in the hospital for a little while. And then my concussion and then I got vertigo. So I had to stay in Nuvik for a while until my vertigo went away. And then I almost had to end the hike because winter was now in. It was November. And I decided I'm just going to go for it anyway. So I had a push cart at this point because the backpack couldn't carry enough gear for the Arctic. And the push cart broke down, so then I switched it up to a sled. I was pulling a sleigh with all my gear on it to finish the Arctic. So that was a crazy journey.
How cold was it when you finished?
The one particular day it got below minus 60 with the wind chill, and I got really severe frostbite. And the locals were like, just thought I was absolutely crazy. They couldn't believe I was. But I hiked through the frostbite anyway, and made it. And it was about. I did a morning show in England, and I did another one in Germany, and they're like, "How cold is it?" And trying to explain what minus 50 is to them, and then the Arctic, the ocean was frozen like meter thick. Like frozen, completely solid.
You couldn't put your foot in it.
No, I walked out onto it though. GPS, the exact point when I hit that third ocean.
You know, it's funny. It's just the other day at home, I had to lift up a trailer. You can actually still see it's purple there. I had to lift a trailer, an aluminum trailer, when it was minus 35, and I grabbed the trailer and I lifted it, and I only pulled it maybe 30 feet, and I ended up with frostbite all the way down my whole hand from holding a piece of metal for 30 seconds. Yeah. Minus 60 is double.
Oh man, I had all the layers on and all the gear, but it was still brutally windy and cold, like just extreme. And but I finished it. And then the cool part is the people of Tuk had all gotten together and opened up the community hall. So when I finished, the whole entire town came out and greeted me. And of course, there's no sunlight at this point. It's almost 24 hours darkness. So that was part of the depression too, was just the being in the dark all the time. So
when you finished, what did you do?
I went back home to Sherwood Park, and then I had to go through a whole slew of interviews and stuff like that. And then I kind of fell into a bit of a depression, just because this thing that I had focused all my energy on for all these years was complete. So I was wondering what I was going to do after that. I'm writing a book, and I'm quite a ways into the book. And I'd like to make a film out of it as well. Yeah. Eventually, with all the video footage and stuff. I've always wanted to. I had sponsors lined up pre-COVID, where I had a truck that ran on biodiesel with a trailer. And I had all my sponsors in ducks in a row. And I had fuel sponsorships. And I was going to travel the whole country again to 3 oceans in this motorhome, and I was going to hit the best trails, like pick all the best trails and redo them all. So I was going to do like the Fundy Footpath was one of the greatest trails. I was going to do some really historical ones, and we were going to film it and turn it into a small docuseries, right? So I had the driver, I had everything.
God, that would be great.
And then COVID hit, and everything was shut down, and the dream went. And here we are 2 years later. And but it worked out in a way because my back was destroyed pretty bad already. And so
how did you destroy your back?
I had a tree fall on me in Forestry. And then I was trying to carry a stretcher, and I was already injured pretty bad. It kind of healed a little bit. And then I was trying to carry a stretcher in to help some other people that got injured in Forestry down this road, and it was a pitch blackout, and I took a hard fall, and I ended up busting my spine. So I fractured my spine, and then I ended up with it burst one of my, what do you call them? Discs, and it just was grinding bone on bone, and the pain was pretty tremendous. And then, but taking all this time off, I've managed to heal, and then they were doing this new type of injection therapy into my back. So now I'm getting my mobility back. So now that I get my mobility back, I can start focusing on getting back into shape because I'd like to hit the trails again. I still haven't given up on the dream of doing a docuseries of hitting all these highlights of the beauty of the whole entire country, you know.
Dude, if you do that, you make sure you tell me you're going, and I'll come with you and walk a couple of those.
Yeah, because
that's been a passion of mine and Scott's too. The last couple of years, took up hiking.
Yeah.
And I'm hooked.
Oh yeah, you guys. Well, you said you do the Grizzly and Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, we do those almost every weekend. Last year I did probably 25, 30 hikes, Viking, Driscoll, Sugar Bowl, all of them. I just never connected across the top Sugar Bowl, Grizzly, Den, but yeah, we do them all.
That's right on. Yeah, that's one of my favorite trails anywhere.
On the hike, I have a couple questions about the structure of it. Did you end up raising money for your dad's?
Yep.
How did that go?
I raised a few $1,000s. It was too difficult for me because I really wanted to do something for the Prince George Brain Injured Group, but it was really hard for me because I had my own agenda, and when people were, are you raising money for anything? I'd say yes, you can go to this website, but nobody would. Instead, they'd give me the cash, and I'd have to carry some cash until I could find a bank to put it in. So sometimes I'd walk around with $300 and loonies and toonies, and I was just like, I can't. And then plus there was talks about structuring my journey into hitting these places and doing some talks with the brain injury, and I was like, but the problem was it was taking too much out of the hike, what the hike was all about in the first place. And the whole point of the hike wasn't really to be asking for money or for a cause. So I tried to keep those two things separate.
Yeah.
In fact, I did a 24-hour walk at the CN Center, where we rented the CN Center out for the whole night. And I did a 24-hour walk where I walked 104 kilometers, 363 laps to raise money for the Prince George Brain Injury Group. So
yeah, that's good.
I've always wanted to try to beat that 104 kilometers, the 363 laps. So maybe that's something for next year, I think.
Yeah, it can be part of your recovering your physical.
Yeah, and
health.
just set myself another challenge. Like, you know, I'll never do anything. Like, I have a lot of American friends that were huge fans because they take 1% of their entire travel budget for their roads and infrastructures, and they put it into trails. So they're light years ahead of us in a lot of ways. And so I have a huge fan base down in the United States, and they'd always tell me, what are you going to do after this? And I'd kind of make fun and be like, I'm going to do a smaller country like the United States. Just to grind them a little bit. But I've always wanted to do, like, you know, other trails around the world too, like Hadrian's Wall. That would be a good one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hiking trails in Ireland. I'd like to do smaller stuff. But the dream to drive across the country and hit all these the top sections of trails.
Because you've seen them and you know which ones.
And I know exactly. I already had the list. I already knew the script. I already knew exactly what to do. And where
so
to
at
go.
the end of the episode, are you going to give me the list of the best trails in Canada so I can take a picture of it and stick it right at the end of this interview, saying go look at these trails?
I'd have to think it through.
Maybe give us 10 or 20. We can stick it in there, saying here's Dana's top 10 trails in Canada for you to go visit. That'd be cool.
Yeah, quite a few of them. Some of them, like, I try to mix it up too, because some of the most beautiful trails were like the Cabell Valley in Saskatchewan was pretty beautiful. I think people don't forget about that. Riding Mountain Park in Manitoba was nice. Manitoba was fun because they're huge fans of the Trans-Can Trail. So I had this weird moment where they invite me to do a small talk with all these trail enthusiasts. So I go in there and I do my talk, and this is when I'd already walked to Manitoba, right? So Northern Ontario didn't really care too much, like whatever guys walking. But then Manitoba was like, you know, every town was greeting you and you're a celebrity, you know, kind of thing. So then I just happened to be like, is there anything we can do for you? And I said, I know this is going to be a tough one, but I'm doing the ultimate Canadian thing. So I've seen all these different sports games. Can I see the Jets? I know they're booked solid. So this one guy comes up to me and he shakes my hand and goes, I think I could do something for you. I was like, right on. You know, all excited. Let's see how this. So I get the phone call to go see the Jets. Turns out he's the owner.
No.
And he's busy, so I got the Chipman seats there, and so I got to go see the Jets, even though they were sold out. So that was pretty cool.
Oh,
and
that's
then,
wild.
yeah, I walked with their premier came out and walked with me for a while, and It was a weird world because I'd spend so much time in the wilderness and alone, and then all of a sudden, and then the Trans-Canada Trail would send me somewhere. Like one of the craziest highlights was I did We Day. If you know what We Day is at all.
That WE charity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is pre all the trouble that I'm getting into. But so anyway, so I got invited to speak there. So I was there and I had lunch with like Martin Luther King III and the Queen of Jordan. And I'm sitting here and they're wearing this nice dress and suit and ties, and I'm wearing my hiking gear, right? And we sat, me and Martin Luther King III had lunch together, talked for a while, and then I got to sit and talk with them, with Miss Harper in the crowd, just the Governor General. Like, I mean, it was just filled with celebrities, you know. And so I did a 5-minute talk in front of all these people. And I remember this one particular guy of the Trans-Canada Trail wanted to get an Olympic athlete or somebody else to do it, because they have this big thing of trail champions, right? Of people that are, you know, support the trail. So I'm right next to Rick Mercer, for example, right? On the back of like the newspaper in Ottawa. So anyway, so I'm just about going to get on stage, and this guy who didn't really want me to be there, but he kind of wanted me to fail a little bit. He looks at me, he goes, "Don't blow this." I said, "Hey, I was charged by grizzly bear once. I'm not too worried about this one." Climbed on stage, did the talk, no problems, and it was brilliant. When you have 16,500 flashes and cameras going off, and it was pretty wild. And then the next thing I know, I'm in northern Alberta all by myself, hiking again in the pouring rain. So,
you know what's funny is I don't think it's like when we talked to Rick Hansen. It's a very similar story where he's like, he went all the way around the world.
Yeah.
And nobody paid attention until he got back to Canada when it exploded. And you did the same thing, just in your own different, smaller way. Crossed a significant chunk of Canada before anybody started paying attention. And then all of a sudden it's this explosion of...
Yeah, it was really strange because with the trail was really heavy into with celebrities and politics. So, I mean, I got to meet a lot of really cool people. Like, you know, the only one that really blossomed into a friendship was Stuart McLean and I. So I was really upset when he passed away because he had done a lot for me. He was he really made sure people went to my website and followed me. So it was a pretty cool what he did.
Dana, that's an awesome story, and it's an awesome life. Like, that's a really cool thing you did, and
yeah,
I'm glad I got to hear that about how you did it and why you did it and what it turned into. I sincerely hope that you can pull off that trip across Canada and make that movie. You know, there's an opportunity for everyone to do something that will leave a legacy behind. The regret I have in listening to your story right now is that I know you and knew you did this, and I didn't know this is what it was. And I'm like, that's tragic when we have these Canadians who do these amazing things and we don't know our own stories. In the States, they get spread around. They have a better media, I guess, more connected. Yeah. And here we have Canadians who do amazing things and they just get missed. And that's why me and Scott talked about doing Crazy Damn Canadians. But, you know, we don't have a reach across Canada other than boosted posts. So I sincerely believe you're onto an idea there that if you could pull that off, and I'd support it in any way I could to get attention on it, but that's limited. I'm from PG and that's my network, but I think you're onto a genius idea. The guy who did the hikes, the person who could do it and get the attention from people if he said, "I'm doing it."
Well, that's how I ended up doing.
Don't give up on it.
That's how I ended up doing all those public speaking. I did an awful lot of it. Like, I've spoken at well over 100 in some schools and spoken in front of, like, done speeches in front of. For example, there was a section of trail they weren't sure if the government wanted to invest money in, and after I had this long conversation with the premier, they signed the paperwork right there to get it done. And everyone was like, "We can't believe we've been working on this forever." And then you come by and you explain what the trail means to you and what the trail means to the people around them, and how it connects these communities. And then all of a sudden he listens to you. And it's like, well, I've done it all. I could tell him how it's improved people's lives in other parts of the country. How it's been, because they wanted to make the whole trail into a park one day. The whole thing will be just one giant park. I really hope they achieve that
I hope
goal.
they do that. That's the best parts about Canada, right?
Yeah, and you don't have to, like, the beauty of it is I remember one time I was standing in the middle of the country, and I always felt like I was walk at some type of Canadian song, like when I crossed the 100th Meridian, of course, the Tragically Hip. And then, of course, Gordon Downey has that one singing the song, no one's interested in something you didn't do. So when everyone was like, are you really going to finish this? It's like, wow, I can't be 3/4 of the way. They'd be like, that's it, guys, I'm packing it up, And it'd be like, no one's interested in something I didn't do.
Yeah, it's like running a marathon to 40 kilometers. You didn't run a marathon.
Or all of a sudden I become this huge Stompin' Tom Connors fan because I felt like I was walking through his life, all these towns like Tillsonburg. I did this radio interview once where I had to pick, I can't remember what it was, but anyway, they wanted me to pick a song, and it was a rock station though. And I'm like, okay, I know you're a rock station, but I'm in Tillsonburg right now. Can you play Tillsonburg? Stompin' Tom Connors, like, for you, Dana, sure. so that was a lot of that kind of cool stuff where you're literally walking in the history of all these people you see on TV and all these historical places that you just are just imaginary, at the time, but then you live it. Like you're in Ottawa. I remember being in Ottawa, and I did like a cheesy Priceless post. I was like sitting in Ottawa after sitting on the nation's capital front lawn. After walking 5,000 kilometers, priceless kind of thing, like after just spending months in Quebec where I was learning French as best I could, and I loved Quebec too. I had such a great time there. They were they're light years ahead of the rest of the country in trail development. Quebec's way ahead of everybody else. Oh yeah, their trail system, their green route is just incredible. It's beautiful. It's easy to follow. It's just, man. Yeah, the rest of the country should follow what Quebec does. I think that'd be great.
So, when are you going to start working on this plan to get this trail going then, or this trip in the van? Are you going to start again?
Not this summer, but next summer. I'm going to just focus on my next goal is to lose the weight, keep the back strong, and I'll never ever be able to do those epic hikes again, but I'll definitely be able to do 4 or 5 day trails, lightweights. And the great thing about having the vehicle is a lot of these trail systems that I will do might be 60 kilometers long, but I'll have the motorhome that can be in certain areas, so I can pack really light. So basically just the camera gear, maybe a drone would be nice, because some of that footage you just have to get from the air. Like Lake Superior was just incredible. I loved walking the shore of that. I walked the whole thing, so it was just that part alone would have been worth it.
For sure.
Yeah.
I got one last question for you. And it's the question we ask of every guest. 31 people have answered. Has everyone answered it, Scott? Everyone's answered it? Okay. Greatest Canadian, or any Canadian that you want. You can actually pick anybody you want, living or dead, that if you could have a conversation with them that you admire, who would you want to
Stuart
talk to?
McLean, again.
Yeah. I was going to say, give me a pen, and I'm going to write down what he's going to say.
Without a doubt,
he's going to say Stuart McLean.
I could have spent so much more time talking with him about all the places he's seen and all the places I've seen. Like, our conversations were just incredible. Like when I did the interview with him, when he gave me the Arthur Award, that was just such a small snippet of what we had talked about for hours and hours, and then continued to talk. Like I knew his producer. I got to know his producer really well too, and so when I'd call, it'd be like another cool guy that I would call every once in a while. And he insisted that I called him and told him where it was Walter Gretzky. He made me call him all the time. He's like, I want to know where you're at, so you got to call me, okay? I really mean it. Do you want to know why? I said, well, why? Because there's a lot of people in the graveyard that would love to get a phone call. That's what he told me. So that was pretty cool. So every once in a while, I'd just call him up and be like, I'm in so-and-so, Ontario. Oh, I know that place, yeah. And then the funniest conversation I ever had with him was, he's like, yeah, I just had this aneurysm, and you've had an aneurysm, or your dad did, and it runs in the family, right? And I was like, yeah, we've had it checked out. And then he goes, yeah, well, did you know that Wayne won't go get checked out? He won't do it. So he goes, I said, well, you tell Wayne that Dana said, go get checked out. So then that conversation happens. Sure enough, he said, yeah, this guy Dana, his dad had a brain aneurysm too. And, Dana, so he went and told Wayne Gretzky that I said he should go get this checked out. I thought that was pretty damn cool, right?
Dana, you've had a wild experience. I genuinely hope you pull that off.
Yeah, me too.
But if not, I'm proud of what you did. I think it's super cool, and I'm glad I got to hear this. I can't wait for you to write the book. Make sure you let us know. And thank you for being a guest on Crazy Damn Canadians.
Thanks for having me. That was awesome.
Yeah.